When I caught him draining our accounts and sleeping with my best friend, I thought I'd lost everything. But then an old letter from my late aunt arrived. One that changed not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of women who came after me. Bund. Let me tell you how I went from betrayed wife to the founder of something that changed everything. The morning it all began, the sun was shining through the kitchen window like nothing was wrong. I was stirring oatmeal, humming to the radio when the phone rang. Mrs. Brooks? The woman's voice asked politely. This is Sandra from First County Bank. I'm just calling to confirm your withdrawal request. My what? I said, still distracted. Your withdrawal of $220,000 from your joint savings account. It's being processed as we speak. My stomach twisted. There's a mistake. I didn't make any withdrawal. Sandra hesitated. We mean poor, I understand, but the authorization was signed by Mr. Daniel Brooks. He's listed as the sole account holder. Blands for a second, I just stood there holding the phone like it might bite me. That's not possible, I said slowly. That's our joint account. Has been since. Ichenjobai Julser E. She lowered her voice. I'm sorry, ma'am. It was restructured earlier this year. Your name isn't on it anymore. The words didn't make sense. I hung up, my oatmeal burning on the stove, and called Daniel's office. Arkand, his assistant, a woman I'd known for years, answered. Oh, Eleanor, I thought he told you. He's out of town for a client meeting. Out of town? I looked at the coffee cup he'd left on the counter an hour earlier. He left for work this morning. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my purse, drove straight to the bank, and demanded answers. The manager, Mark, looked miserable when I handed him our account papers. Ellie, he said softly, it's all legal. Daniel made changes 6 months ago. He's the sole owner now. 6 months. That was when he'd started working late on Thursdays. When my best friend Linda stopped meeting me for coffee, always too busy with work. Linda. By the time I got home, my pulse was racing. I went through Daniel's office, pulling open every drawer, folder, and cabinet. Under a stack of tax returns, I found a hidden envelope labeled personal. Banned inside were bank transfers, property sale deeds, even emails between him and Linda. We're almost there, one read. Once the last account clears, she'll have nothing left to claim. I felt my knees go weak. Banja. That evening, when Daniel came home whistling, I was waiting at the kitchen table, with the papers spread out in front of me. And Danny, I said calmly, can we talk? He froze when he saw what was on the table. Ben, looks like you've been busy, I said, my voice steady. Selling property, hiding money, and Linda Carter helping you with the paperwork. The color drained from his face. Ellie, please, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I said quietly. But this time you'll be explaining it to a lawyer. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Banda. For 40 years, Daniel Brooks had made all the financial decisions. That day, I decided to make my own. Daniel didn't sleep at home that night. Not because I kicked him out, but because I told him the dot. Truth in a tone that left him with nowhere to run. Bance. He'd always been the one with the calm voice, the negotiator, the reasonable one. But that evening, I saw something new in him, fear. Momjant, when I handed him the printed emails and property deeds, he couldn't meet my eyes. Saubik, Ben, you transferred the money into an offshore account, I said, my voice shaking more with fury than sadness. And you listed your mistress as the secondary beneficiary. He swallowed hard. Ellie, it's not what you think. Oh, spare me that line, I snapped. You emptied our savings, sold the lake house my parents left us, and you lied. Not just to me, but to everyone who ever trusted you. Bonnie tried to reach for my hand. I did it to protect us. You worry too much about money. You don't protect us? I stood up, my chair scraping across the tile. You stole from me. You left me. one bounce check away from losing everything I built with you. Brad, Daniel's mask cracked. You don't understand how complicated this is. I had to make choices. I had to make choices. Rain, you wouldn't have handled it. That was it, that patronizing tone. Kank. The same tone he'd used for years whenever I'd asked to look at our investments or questioned why we needed to refinance again. I pointed toward the door. You have 10 minutes to leave this house, Daniel. You can take your clothes in your car. But if you touch another thing that belongs to me, I'll have the sheriff escort you out. He stared at me, maybe expecting me to cry, to beg him to stay. But all I felt was a cold kind of clarity. A cold kind of clarity. You'll regret this, he said finally. You'll see what it's like without me, maybe, I said. But at least it'll be honest. He left without another word. Bling. That night I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, statements, and the wreckage of my life. My hands trembled as I tried to calculate what I had left. The answer was simple. Almost nothing. Ben. The next morning I drove to the local attorney's office. My friend's son, Oliver Grant, had just taken over his father's practice, and though he was young, he listened carefully as I explained everything. He's removed your name from all joint assets, Oliver said grimly. He's removed your name from all joint assets, Oliver said grimly. But we can still build a case. Fraud, misrepresentation, asset concealment. You might not get everything back, but you'll get justice. Justice. The word sounded hollow, but it was all I had left. I returned home exhausted, only to find a small cream-colored envelope wedged in my mailbox. The return address said Law Offices of Whitaker and Hall, Boston, M.A. Inside was a letter, typed on old stationery. Dear Miss S. Brooks, this letter was to be delivered to you upon confirmation of your husband's financial misconduct. Your late aunt, Clara Whitaker, established a private trust in your name in Echenjubite Jushabad. The trust remains unclaimed. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. I read the letter 3 times before it sank in. Aunt Clara, my mother's older sister, had died nearly 20 years ago. I hadn't seen her since childhood. She'd been one of those fiercely independent women who never married, traveled alone, and invested in real estate before women were even encouraged to. And now, decades later, her name had appeared like a lifeline. Blonde. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the horizon, I sat in my dark kitchen staring at that letter. Daniel had taken everything I'd built, but maybe, just maybe, Aunt Clara had left me something he could never touch. No. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. The following morning, I packed a small suitcase, made a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and booked a train ticket to Boston. For the first time in weeks, I had something that resembled purpose. Not vengeance, not grief, but a direction. Munda. The rhythmic clatter of the train tracks lulled me into thought. Through the window, the landscape blurred past empty fields, small towns, and, eventually, the sprawling skyline of Boston. I hadn't been there since I was a girl visiting Aunt Clara's townhouse, a stately brick building, with ivy creeping up its walls and an old brass door knocker shaped like a lion's head. Aunt Clara had been my mother's opposite. Where Mom was cautious and traditional, Clara was bold, sharp-tongued, and fiercely independent. I remembered how she used to tell me, "Never let anyone make you feel small about money, Eleanor. Control it or someone else will." I never really understood what she meant. Until now. When I arrived at Whitaker and Hall, I was greeted by a tall woman with silver hair and the kind of posture that demanded attention. "I'm Margaret Hall," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "You must be Mrs. Brooks. I've been waiting a long time for you. Seesh in the prepisam Miss Act." "I've been waiting a long time for you? You knew my aunt?" I asked. Her expression softened. Very well. Clara was one of my first clients and one of the sharpest businesswomen I ever met. She set up a trust nearly 3 decades ago, with very specific instructions. She gestured toward a conference room. Please have a seat, I sat, heart thudding as she slid a thick folder across the table. Your aunt's trust was never about money alone, Margaret explained. It was about protection. She told me that one day you might need a safety net. Not because you'd be reckless, but because you'd be too trusting. Because I blinked. She actually said that? Coup word for word. Margaret opened the folder, revealing a set of documents neatly bound with a ribbon. Clara left you a portfolio, investments, property, and liquid assets. It was designed to activate if you were ever financially defrauded by a spouse. Man. I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You mean she predicted this? Eel. Margaret smiled faintly. Clara didn't predict it. She prepared for it. And inside the folder were property deeds for 3 small apartment buildings in Boston, modest savings accounts, and an investment portfolio worth nearly Lubide Ling. I pressed a hand to my chest, struggling to breathe. This can't be real. It's real, Margaret assured me. Clara was a master investor. She believed that independence wasn't just emotional, it was financial. The trust was structured to remain dormant until you needed it most. Trang de Singdor time. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. My aunt had seen a future I couldn't imagine and built me a way out of it. Margaret slid one more envelope across the table. Clara also left a personal letter. She insisted it only be opened by you. Now, Mum, my hands trembled as I unfolded the aged paper, still faintly scented with lavender. Bambled my dearest Eleanor, you know. If you're reading this, it means you've learned the truth about someone who never deserved your trust. I've lived long enough to know that betrayal often hides behind polite smiles and wedding rings. But listen to me carefully. This is not the end of your life. It's the beginning of the one you should have been living all along. Use this gift not to retreat, but to rebuild. For yourself, and for other women who will one day need someone. To remind them that money is power, and power in the right hands can change everything. Clara, by the time I finished reading, my tears had smudged the ink. Margaret placed a reassuring hand on mine. Your aunt believed in you, Miss S. Brooks. She said you'd find your strength when everything else was taken away. Manda. I looked at the documents spread before me, the legal proof of my second chance. Daniel had stolen my savings. But Clara had left me an empire. The train ride back to Ohio felt different. 3 days earlier, I'd been a broken woman, angry, ashamed, and frightened about what tomorrow might bring. Now I had a folder full of documents that could change everything. Bea and I stared out the window, clutching Aunt Clara's letter like a lifeline. Her words replayed in my head. Use this gift not to retreat, but to rebuild. Bend. When I returned home, the house felt colder than before. Daniel's absence left an eerie quiet, but it was a quiet I could live with. I made myself a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and called my lawyer. Ben Oliver, I said when he answered. I want to move forward with the case, but I also have something new, something that changes the game. And within an hour, I was sitting in his office, spreading out the trust documents. His eyes widened as he scanned the papers. Lenore, he said, almost in disbelief, this is substantial. If everything here checks out, you're financially secure, and your husband has no legal claim to any of it. Blamed. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. I leaned forward. I don't want to just protect myself, Oliver. I want to make sure Daniel pays for what it russ. I want to make sure Daniel pays for what he did. He nodded slowly. Then we'll do both. I'll file for divorce immediately and petition for asset recovery, fraudulent transfers, property concealment, and breach of fiduciary duty. He'll be cornered legally before he even realizes what's happening. As he began drafting paperwork, I felt something awaken inside me, a calm, deliberate kind of power I hadn't known I possessed. Bond. That evening, I began rebuilding my life in silence. I closed our joint accounts, changed the locks, and called the property manager handling Aunt Clara's Boston buildings. The rent income alone was enough to cover my expenses for months. Manja. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for Daniel's permission to make a financial decision. 2 days later, he called. Allie. His voice cracked through the phone, full of false remorse. Please, let's talk. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I don't think so, Daniel, I said evenly. I've already filed for divorce. Bond. He fell silent for a moment, then laughed. That sharp, dismissive laugh that used to make me feel small. You? File for divorce? You don't even have money for a retainer. Oh, don't worry about me, I said. I have all the help I need. That silenced him. Lumbia. A few days later, my lawyer called to say Daniel had hired an aggressive defense attorney, one known for intimidating spouses into cheap settlements. But this time, he was in for a surprise, because what Daniel didn't know was that I had leverage. Before leaving Boston, I'd asked Margaret Hall to look into Daniel's company's financial activities. Within 48 hours, she'd uncovered irregularities, forged client signatures, misreported earnings, even a false tax deduction. Belander. When I shared this with Oliver, he leaned back in his chair. He's not just a liar, he said. He's committed federal fraud. A plan began to form in my mind, not out of revenge, but necessity. Daniel had spent years controlling me through fear and manipulation. The only way to truly free myself was to make sure he could never do this to anyone else again. So I started documenting everything, every transaction, every lie, every forged signature I could find. I spent sleepless nights piecing together a timeline of his deceit, cross-referencing it with what Margaret's firm discovered. Believed. The next time Daniel called, I was ready. I hope you're enjoying that motel room, I said coolly, because once the IRS sees your company's ledgers, you'll be lucky to afford a bed at all. And he cursed under his breath. You think you can destroy me? No, Daniel, I replied. You already did that yourself. I'm just filing the paperwork. For the first time, he had no comeback. As I hung up and looked around my kitchen. Once our shared space, now my sanctuary. The fear that had haunted me for weeks was gone. In its place was something stronger, determination. Aunt Clara had prepared me for this, without ever saying a word, and I was finally ready to use every bit of what she'd left me. Not just the money, but the wisdom, to start over on my own terms. The first hearing was a week later. I arrived early, wearing the navy blue suit I'd once saved for Daniel's business dinners, the ones I was never invited to attend. This time it was my stage. Daniel showed up looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His once carefully styled hair was graying at the temples, his tie crooked. He tried to smile when he saw me, that same charming grin that had fooled me for decades. But I didn't flinch. When the judge entered, the air shifted. My lawyer, Oliver, stood tall beside me as the proceedings began. Amend your honor, he said calmly. We intend to prove that Mr. Brooks not only defrauded my client financially, but also engaged in illegal transfers. That designed to strip her of all assets before filing for divorce himself. Daniel's lawyer, a slick man named Martin Lane, stood up quickly. Objection, Your Honor. This is a gross exaggeration. My client was managing household finances as part of his marital duties. Oliver slid a folder across the table. We have emails, Your Honor. Signed deeds, offshore transfers, falsified property records, all in Mr. Brooks's handwriting, including messages sent to a third party, a Ms. Linda Carter, indicating premeditated concealment. The courtroom went silent. Daniel's jaw tightened. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering furiously, Dance? The judge glanced over the documents, then looked directly at Daniel, Mr. Brooks. These are serious allegations. You will submit full financial disclosure within 7 days. Failure to do so will result in immediate seizure of all accessible accounts. Banjo, for the first time, Daniel's confidence cracked. I didn't say a word during the rest of the session. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation I could make. And afterward, in the courthouse hallway, Daniel approached me. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly, his voice trembling. "You could have just walked away." Bendy sits. I for were counting for. I turned to him. "That's what you were counting on, that I'd stay quiet, like always. But you underestimated me." Mance, he tried to reach for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't," I warned. "Uliste. You lost that right when you stole our life." Mdn. As he walked away, head bowed, I felt something unexpected, not anger but release. The years of being talked over, dismissed, and controlled, gone, replaced by something unfamiliar but liberating: control. Mom. That evening I sat in my living room surrounded by papers, calculators, and endless cups of tea. For the first time, I wasn't overwhelmed by numbers. I was empowered by them. Every figure, every decimal, every asset I reclaimed was proof that I could manage my life just fine without Daniel Brooks. The next day, I met with Margaret Hall on a video call. "Yo, Eleanor," she said, smiling warmly. "I've reviewed your trust holdings. You're in a strong position. The rental properties are producing steady income, and the investments have grown substantially. What are your plans?" "Yo." I hesitated. "Honestly? I don't just want to survive this. I want to build something meaningful." "Your aunt would like that," Margaret said. "Clara always believed wealth meant little unless it served a purpose." Those words stayed with me all night. Blamed. The next morning, while sorting through old photos, I found one of Aunt Clara standing in front of a brick building with a sign that read Whitaker Women's Cooperative, established Echen Jubite Loksharar. I remembered her telling me about it when I was a child, a program she'd started to help widows and divorced women learn bookkeeping and small business management. Beyond. That's when it hit me. Maybe I couldn't undo what Daniel did to me. Boy. But I could use what Clara left me to help other women who been trapped just like I was. Women who'd handed over their trust, their finances, their freedom, only to be left with nothing. Bando, it wasn't revenge I wanted anymore. It was purpose, I called Oliver. Once the case is settled, I said, I want to open a foundation. Something practical. A place where women can learn financial literacy, legal basics, and rebuild after financial betrayal. He paused. That's ambitious, Eleanor. First, but the prot, not what I need, I corrected him. But I think it's exactly what you need, not what I need. What we need. Band. Because for the first time in my life, I understood that independence wasn't just about walking away from someone. It was about walking towards something better. And I intended to do just that. The final hearing came faster than I expected. 2 months of filing statements and late-night strategy calls had all led to this day. The one that would finally end my marriage to Daniel Brooks. Wamda, I sat in the courtroom, calm but alert. I'd stopped wearing my wedding ring weeks ago. Now, there was only the faint pale line on my finger, where it used to be, a ghost of a life that no longer fit. But Daniel sat across from me, looking smaller somehow. His lawyer was tense, flipping through papers that probably made less and less sense the longer the investigation went on. The IRS had joined the case now, thanks to the fraudulent property transfers and offshore accounts Margaret's team had uncovered. Burnt when the judge entered, Oliver rose. Your Honor, we have submitted new evidence. Mr. Brooks not only concealed marital assets but falsified income reports for tax purposes. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Brooks, this evidence shows willful intent to defraud both your spouse and federal authorities. Do you have any response? Bing Daniels' voice cracked. Your Honor, I was under financial pressure. It was never meant to hurt anyone. Mond Oliver didn't even look up from his notes, yet it did. Miss S. Brooks lost her savings, her property, and her financial security, all due to her husband's deception. We request full restitution, punitive damages, and transfer of all remaining assets to my client. The judge nodded slowly. Request granted. The words echoed in the courtroom. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, but when it came, it felt strangely quiet, not triumphant, just steady, blamed. Daniel turned to me once as the bailiff escorted him out, and for a fleeting second, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred, regret, but sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I didn't speak to them. I wasn't ready to become anyone's headline. Instead, I walked straight to Oliver's office, where he handed me a slim folder. Bond, it's over, he said with a small smile. The house, the cars, and what's left of his business assets, all legally yours. He signed everything this morning to avoid federal prosecution, I exhaled, the weight of months lifting off my shoulders. And the foundation paperwork? He filed. The Eleanor Brooks Initiative for Financial Independence is now officially recognized as a nonprofit. You can begin operating as soon as you're ready. I nodded, unable to hide my smile. Then, let's begin. Plan that evening. I drove back to my house, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a stranger in it. I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and began sketching out ideas. Bon to Aunt Clara's Old Women's Cooperative became my blueprint. But I wanted something bigger, not just a charity, but a program that taught women to take control of their finances, their credit, and their confidence. I reached out to Margaret in Boston. I want to use the trust to fund the first year, I told her. A pilot program in Millbridge. Budgeting, financial literacy, basic legal rights. Everything women like me never learned until it was too late. Margaret's smile warmed through the phone. You're not just rebuilding, Eleanor. You're rewriting your story. The following weeks blurred into movement, meetings with accountants, lawyers, real estate agents. I sold the house Daniel had once loved so much and bought an old red brick building downtown that used to be a small library. Londa. The place smelled of dust and forgotten stories, but it had strong bones and wide windows that let the light pour in. Perfect for a new beginning. I spent every morning there, cleaning, painting, organizing paperwork with volunteers who'd heard whispers of my story and wanted to help. One afternoon, while sorting through donated furniture, I found an old chalkboard in the back room. On it, I wrote the foundation's motto, simple but true. Knowledge is security. Independence is power. Banja. When I stepped back and looked at those words, I realized something that made my throat tighten. This wasn't just Aunt Clara's legacy anymore. It was mine. As I turned off the lights that evening, I caught my reflection in the dusty window. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't someone's wife, someone's mistake, or someone's victim. She was Eleanor Brooks, and she was just getting started. The first day of the foundation's opening felt like spring after a long, merciless winter. A soft drizzle had washed the streets clean overnight, and sunlight was breaking through as I stood in front of the red brick building with a set of keys that trembled slightly in my hand. The sign above the door read, the Eleanor Brooks Foundation. Financial independence starts here. It wasn't grand, but it was real. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and hope. We'd filled the rooms with donated desks, second-hand computers, and hand-me-down office chairs. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. By 4 a.m., the first group of women arrived. 7 of them. Some young, some middle-aged, a few older than me, all carrying the same expression I'd once worn, uncertainty mixed with quiet desperation. A woman named Janice was the first to speak. "I don't even know where to start," she said softly. "My husband took everything. I don't even have my own bank account." I smiled gently. "Then you're already starting, Janice." Right here, we began with basics. I taught them how to open individual savings accounts, check credit reports, and understand joint asset laws. I brought in Oliver once a week to hold free legal clinics. And every Saturday, a retired accountant named Ruth volunteered to teach budgeting workshops. The transformation was slow, but visible. By the end of the first month, women were showing up early, staying late, helping one another fill out job applications or track expenses. The building that once felt like an empty shell now hummed with purpose. One afternoon, as I organized paperwork in my small office, Margaret Hall called from Boston. "Kakwon. I heard the grand opening was a success," she said warmly. "Yeah." "It was more than that," I replied, glancing at the laughter echoing down the hall. "It felt alive." "Immense." "I'm not surprised," Margaret said. "Clara always said the best investments are made in people, not numbers." Then her words made me pause. For years, I'd let Daniel convince me that money was something only he could manage, something mysterious, too complex for me. Now, I was teaching others the truth, that money isn't power until you understand how to use it. Belinda, that evening, I sat alone in the classroom after everyone had left. The setting sun painted the walls golden. I opened my old notebook and wrote, "We teach women how to rebuild, not just recover, because freedom isn't given, it's learned." Just as I closed the notebook, I heard the door creak open. It was a young woman, no older than 25, clutching a crumpled envelope. Her eyes were red from crying. "Ben, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I saw the sign outside. I don't have an appointment." "That's all right," I said softly. "Come in." She hesitated before sitting down. "My fiancé controls everything. My phone, my job, my money. He says it's for my own good." Her voice cracked. "I want to leave, but I have nowhere to go." Manger. Her story sent a chill through me. It was too familiar, the same subtle manipulation that starts with care and ends with control. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Emily, Emily," I said. "You're not alone anymore." We spent the next hour creating a safety plan, opening a secure email, setting up a private bank account, and connecting her with one of our partner shelters for temporary housing. By the time she left, her hands were still shaking, but her eyes held something new, a spark of courage. And when the door closed behind her, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about me winning back my independence anymore. It was about giving it away, over and over again, until women like Emily didn't have to learn the hard way, like I did. Being that night, I pinned Aunt Clara's old photograph to the corkboard above my desk. Beneath it, I wrote on a scrap of paper, she built the safety net, I'll keep it strong." As I turned off the lights, I realized something beautiful. The life Daniel tried to destroy had become the foundation for dozens of others to rebuild theirs. And this was only the beginning. A year passed in what felt like moments. The foundation that began with 7 women in a dusty brick building had grown into a full-fledged movement. Every day, I watched miracles unfold. Not loud, cinematic miracles, but quiet, determined ones. Janice, who once didn't have her own bank account, now ran bookkeeping for a small business. Downtown, Ruth had developed an online budgeting course that reached over 2,000 women across the state. And Emily, the young woman who'd arrived trembling at my door, was now a counselor at the foundation, helping others build the same courage she once borrowed. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. A local newspaper ran a story titled, "Widow Turns Betrayal into Blueprint for Women's Independence." Then came phone calls from nearby towns, from journalists, from women who'd heard whispers about a place that taught financial freedom in plain English. Honest, I never planned to be anyone's symbol, but one morning I woke up to find my photo in a national magazine under the headline, "The Woman Who Turned Her Divorce into a Revolution." The attention was overwhelming at first. Reporters wanted interviews, sponsors wanted partnerships, lawmakers wanted to discuss women's empowerment, though most had never lifted a finger to support it before. But amid all that noise, I stayed grounded in what mattered most: the women who walked through our doors every morning with shaking hands and looked a little stronger each evening. Yes, see, damned. One afternoon, I received a call from Margaret Hall. Her voice carried its usual calm, but with a note of pride. "Eleanor," she said, "I just read about your foundation in the Boston Herald. They're calling it one of the most innovative social finance programs in the country." I laughed softly. Clara would have had a field day with that. "She would have," Margaret agreed, "and she'd be asking what you planned to do next." The question lingered long after the call ended. Jengs, that weekend, I flew to Boston for the first time since the trust was activated. I visited Aunt Clara's old townhouse, now repurposed into a small business center. The caretaker, a kindly older man, let me in. "Baines, your aunt used to hold meetings right here in this parlor," smiling. "Your aunt used to hold meetings right here in this parlor," he said, smiling. "She'd sit in that chair and tell women how to balance ledgers before computers ever did it for us." But I ran my hand over the worn wooden table, imagining her there, sharp-eyed, confident, unafraid. And that's when the idea took root. Why stop at one foundation? Oblinger. By the time I flew back home, the plan was clear: expand the model to other towns, not just Ohio, but nationwide. Aunt Clara's trust had grown through its investments, and with the court settlement finalized, I had enough funding to open at least 3 new branches. Bang. When I told Oliver, he grinned. "You're about to become a household name, Eleanor?" I smiled back. Names fade. Impact doesn't. Ememdus within months, we launched the Clara Network, a partnership initiative named in honor of my aunt, a series of independent women's finance centers across the country, all connected through shared resources, mentorship, and training. Our first branch opened in Boston, followed by 2 more in Denver and Atlanta. Each opening drew crowds of women eager to learn, to rebuild, to reclaim control. And then one afternoon, I received an email that left me speechless. "Dear Miss S. Brooks, my name is Catherine Willis. I'm a producer for PBS. We're developing a documentary on financial abuse and empowerment, and we'd be honored to feature your work, Blends." When we filmed the segment weeks later, the crew spent 2 days capturing life inside the foundation. The workshops, the laughter, the tears. Okay. At the end of the interview, the reporter asked, "What do you say to women who feel it's too late to start over?" "Bendis," I thought for a moment. "It's never too late," I said quietly. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you were capable of building more than you ever had." Band. When the episode aired, our inbox overflowed with messages from across the country, women sharing their own stories of escape, courage, and rediscovery. That night, I stood alone in the foundation's garden, the one we planted behind the building. The air smelled of lilacs, the same scent that used to fill Aunt Clara's townhouse. Beliance, the world was beginning to notice what she'd started, and what I was continuing. It wasn't fame I felt. It was fulfillment, but deep down I knew something bigger was coming. Because whenever life starts to bloom again, the past has a way of sending one final test. And mine was just around the corner. 2 years had passed since the day Daniel walked out of our home, leaving me with nothing but debt, betrayal, and a half-burned pot of oatmeal on the stove. Now, I was standing on a stage in Washington, D.C., delivering the keynote address at the National Women's Financial Summit. I looked out at a room filled with senators, lawyers, business leaders, and most importantly, survivors. copycat women who had turned pain into purpose, just like I had. My name is Eleanor Brooks, I began. 2 years ago, my husband emptied our accounts, sold our assets, and left me believing my life was over. But instead of breaking me, that betrayal became my education. And today, I stand before you as the founder of the Clara Network, an organization built to make sure no woman ever faces what I did, alone. Bon applause echoed across the hall. Warm and full of understanding. Mended when I stepped off the stage, Margaret was waiting for me, tears in her eyes. Clara would have been so proud, she whispered. Menda, I think she already knows, I said, smiling through the lump in my throat. On that evening, as the conference banquet ended, I returned to my hotel room to find a sealed envelope slipped under the door. The return address made my stomach tighten. Federal Correctional Institution, Springfield, Missouri. Daniel. Mana. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Bendeliner. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. My health has failed faster than I expected. Don't worry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know that losing you taught me everything I refused to learn in time. I used to think control was power, but it was fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of being dependent, fear of you realizing you never needed me. And I was right about that. You never did. If there's one thing I've learned here, it's that regret doesn't fix anything. But I hope knowing you built something good out of what I destroyed brings you some peace. You won, Ellie. You finally won, Daniel. I sat there in silence, the city lights flickering through the window. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. What I felt was closure, pure, quiet closure. For years, I'd carried the shadow of Daniel's choices. But now, that weight lifted. He had finally acknowledged what I already knew. That control built on fear always collapses, while strength built on knowledge endures. Spina. The next morning, I flew home to Ohio. The foundation was busier than ever, with new volunteers, expanding programs, and young women leading initiatives I could only dream of. When this began, Emily met me at the entrance, grinning. You got mail, she said, handing me a large envelope. From Oxford University, of all places. Inside was a formal letter and a certificate embossed with gold. The University of Oxford hereby confers upon Mrs. Eleanor Brooks an honorary doctorate in social empowerment and financial advocacy for her groundbreaking work in women's independence. I sank into a chair, speechless. Aunt Clara, who never finished college but understood the world better than most professors, would have laughed herself hoarse at the irony. Later that evening, I stood in the garden behind the foundation, the same garden where dozens of women now gathered weekly for classes and community. The lilacs were blooming again, their scent drifting through the warm air. Emily approached quietly. There's someone waiting in the classroom, she said. A woman who just found out her husband drained their accounts. She doesn't know where to begin. I nodded, smiling gently. Then let's start where we always do, by showing her she's not alone. Manda. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the framed photo of Aunt Clara, smiling sternly from her Jubite Liquor's office. And next to it, a plaque that read, No, the Clara Network, founded on the belief that independence isn't inherited. It's learned. In that moment, I realized my story wasn't about revenge or even justice anymore. It was about transformation, how loss, when faced with courage, becomes legacy. Daniel had taken everything he could measure, but what he couldn't touch, my resilience, my intelligence, my will to rise, had multiplied into something he never could have imagined. When I stepped into the classroom, the new woman looked up, eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. On high, I said softly, pulling out a chair beside her. My name's Eleanor. Tell me where we'll begin. Dance. Her voice shook as she started to speak, but I smiled. already knowing how her story could end, not in defeat, but in freedom. Because I'd been her once, and now I was the proof that she could be me.